Okay, hold on. Okay, start reading the title of the paper again.
Ron, we gotta shorten your titles, man. You had to take a breath and get ready for it. You were like,
I love titles like this.
oh, I know you do. If it doesn't have a colon in it, you know Laurent didn't write it.
Close entity encounters of the psychedelic kind. Insights and inspiration from the evolutionary psychology of religion.
Why don't you just use the first part? This is the funny thing that, like, whenever Laurent and I come up with a paper title, I usually just kind of let him do it because he comes up with the funnier one. But it's always two titles. There's the first title, colon, the second title.
Yeah, no, I learned.
Just get rid of the second title.
I learned this back in the 1800s when I was doing my PhD. Over 80% of articles that are accepted have a subtitle. Like subtitles, just for some reason, it has a psychological effect. People, reviewers, editors like subtitles. So if you'll notice, I think all 100, 200, whatever articles I have subtitles.
Yep.
It's funny.
It's the same thing with blog posts. Subtitles do better.
We could do an analysis of all academic titles broken by semicolon as a delimiter, and just analyze the first and the second, and just do an article where we present the results called "Your subtitle sucks," semicolon, "Your subtitle sucks."
I love it.
All right.
It's one of those things. It's academic tradition. It's like, oh, you're writing a paper about, X. You need to write about founding father Y of that subdiscipline, or you won't be accepted.
Yeah, it's a crazy world.
Yeah, and I've done it myself too, when the subtitles and all of this, and sometimes publishers tell you get one.
Yeah.
And that annoys the crap out of me. It's like, look, when you start paying for crap, if you pay me per download on this article, on these sexy topics like AI and religion, then you can tell me what to do. Until then, go get me some clicks.
Go get me some clicks.
Go get me some clicks. That's about as much tolerance as I have for academic publishing. Go get me some clicks.
Fighting extremism with AI.
On psychedelics.
With psychedelics? Oh my gosh, so there's going to be psychedelics.
That stream will be approved.
On high or getting high?
I've already got one viewer in Reddit on acid, so we're off to a good start.
Dude, nice. I'm ready for the rabbit hole, Josh.
Beginning of our stream.
I hope that guy's name is Josh because I just freaked his freak out.
Quicksilver 6, yeah. Have a good trip.
We're here
That's right,
live in topia.io/citizens talking about de-radicalizing, and I apparently am streaming the wrong thing. De-radicalizing with AI. We're here with doctors Justin Lane and Laurent Schultz. It's so every single time it comes out of my mouth. Dr. Justin Lane and doctors Laurent Schultz. Either you have a personality disorder or you're a sadomasochist. I got 2 doctorates. Or both.
Or both.
The Dr. Schultz.
But yeah, so semicolons and beyond, here we are. So it's funny because we just went through that whole thing pre-stream, and now I'm struggling for an actual thoughtful comment to start us off. But Laurent, do you want to? I guess is your paper on psychedelics also about religion?
Oh, we're not doing fighting extremism.
We are, but so one of the things that Brandon. I mean, I believe I know I've seen theses. I don't know if I've seen studies, but I've seen theses on if more people were to do psychedelics, we'd have less wars.
Yeah, I'm hearing a noise in the background. It's hard to hear. Can you?
Yeah,
Brandon, it seems like you have some echo. You might be coming in with your external microphone.
That's no.
Yep.
If you need to, you can mute Brandon while he sorts out his,
I muted him.
Situation. Actually, yeah. Can we create a societal simulation of what our society would be like if everyone has done a psychedelic drug?
Whew.
Dude. I've simulated. We've already simulated that, dude.
Wait, why did
No,
that not get
I
pressed?
know, but I
Right?
think, but it's really related. These two topics are related because if you buy the claim that early human societies, I mean, like 100,000 to 10,000 years ago, were at least in part influenced by shamans and others engaged in psychedelic substances, then and that was one of the ways in which the sects, SECTS, of small-scale societies held together this sort of belief in an engagement with supernatural beings and sort of shamanic practices, then that I think, Justin, I'd be very curious to hear what you think here. The extremism in the form that we now experience it today didn't happen in those kinds of societies. I don't mean violence didn't happen. I don't mean there weren't psychotic people, but I mean extremism in the sense that one or a small group breaks away from the large-scale beliefs and feels oppressed and attacked, and so violently attacks the system. You just don't have enough structure. You don't have enough governmental differentiation and societal distinctions and hierarchy in order for that to happen. So I myself, I don't think that more psychedelics would solve the problem, but the therapeutic use of psychedelics and more openness to different human states of consciousness, I think it would help. I think it could help.
Mm. I definitely think that as a therapy, that psychedelics have plenty of evidence to suggest that they're viable and that they should be being used right now. And how exactly that would work might need a little bit more fine tuning here and there, but I think that there's enough evidence to show, at least from a safety perspective, that the propaganda that resulted in their being banned is no longer valid. That's been debunked. And so we can get to the more serious issue of how we can use this from a therapeutic issue. From a historical issue, I generally agree, actually, that if we're in a smaller scale society, that extremism wouldn't take the same form that we did, because of the relationship of altered states of consciousness, not just psychedelics, but generally altered states of consciousness, where you can use beers, you can use alcohols, you can use different plants, smoking tobacco. There's all sorts of different ways where you can alter your state of consciousness to make it have different effects.
Laying in a cave for 2 days.
Yeah, laying in a cave. Sensory deprivation is actually a really cool way of doing altered states of consciousness. I mean, people, what is it? Joe Rogan paid like $1 bajillion for a sensory deprivation chamber. So people are still doing that today. And it definitely can create a system where it kind of it fuzzies the mind in regards to concepts and how they're related. So one of the relationships between hallucinogenic drug use and schizophrenia is the creation of different neural pathways that would not have been activated regularly before. So in that way, you're crossing concepts. And when you do that, you start to dilute the centrality of any one specific concept that could be the target of your extremism. So in a lot of the simulations Laurent and I have done, extremism, like the backbone of extremism, is really shown to be a really intense commitment to a particular idea that represents your group. But when you have intense idiosyncratic experiences, like the use of psychedelics, you're really left to kind of figure out the meaning of that experience on your own. And so the use of those psychedelics can actually attenuate any tendencies towards extremism, because your experiences are your own, and there's not really a ready-made worldview to interpret those intense, experiences in any way. There are instances where that backfires. So there are documented cases of cults that use drugs, where the cult leader will basically force intense drug use on the followers, and then basically tell them how then to interpret those experiences, and that can lead to extremism. So the most like popularly known instance of this is the Manson family, where Manson was basically giving them the ready-made interpretation for their psychedelic experiences as part of this, very weird end times view, where he was sort of the god and they were bringing about the end times through their actions. And in that case, you can see where the psychedelic use basically contributed to like a sort of brainwashing, if you will. I don't like that term, but to a sort of brainwashing, where as they rebuilt their beliefs coming out of those psychedelic experiences, the interpretation of what just happened to them got funneled into this really weird Charles Manson idiosyncrasy that became social. And when that extreme experience becomes socially shared, you start to get the sort of extremism that we see today. Historically, of course, we never really had that. So we wouldn't have had the sort of extremism that we see today because our groups weren't bound by belief. So belief never would have been the impetus for extremism. Our groups were bound by social relationships. And so you were checked from extremism by your social relationship.
Casual bite of the sandwich after talking about religious extremism.
No. Makes me hungry. Although here, I don't know why they do this. It's definitely an Eastern European thing. They put butter on their sandwiches.
Yeah, here in Norway too.
Dude, that is the whitest thing.
It's decadent.
Well, Norway's pretty white.
Dude, it's like snow everywhere. Even
But
the
like the
people.
example you just gave is an extreme one, Justin, of the Manson cult. But human brains, almost all human brains are drawn to this under certain conditions. So if you take even far less extreme example of the charismatic or Pentecostal churches, there's no, or most of the time there's no psychedelic use involved. But the synchronic movement, the loud music, the raising of hands, the openness, I think people are having altered states of consciousness and experiences there, and then depending on the kind of church or setting, sometimes people can interpret their own experiences. But sometimes you get a powerful or a dominant kind of pastor who tells people what the right interpretation of these experiences are. But the point is, our brains have evolved to sort of be somewhat naturally drawn into this kind of experience.
I think definitely. Neurophysiologically, the fact that our brains react in these ways to these substances in such reliable and patterned ways, suggests that is the case. I mean, other primate species and other like animals that are of higher intelligence, like birds, for example, also use altered states of consciousness too, right? Like, there's a lot of bird species that go out and eat rotten fruit because it's fermented on the vine.
What?
And so they're basically like altering their state of consciousness for funsies, because they can. Now, arguably, there's digestive benefits to having additionally fermented liquids in your gut for digestion, but the byproduct of that is that you also get a little fucked up. So there's like this interesting thing where there's this byproduct selection in the evolutionary story for altered states of consciousness that have both health benefits and mental health benefits and alterations that can be really powerful. When you look at it from a societal scale, right? One person drinking is an alcoholic, but 15 people drinking is a party.
Yeah.
And it's funny because religion works the same way, right?
Exactly.
One guy who hears voices that tell him what to do and what's right and wrong and that the end of the world is coming is a crazy person. 15 people is tax exempt.
I need that on a t-shirt imminently, please.
I had a shirt. I used to have a whole host of like offensive religious shirts. Only one of which I still have because my wife stole it from me. She threw away the rest when we got married. And it's a picture. It's with Jesus with a fender, and it says "Jesus rocks." But then my other favorite one was that guns don't kill people, crazy religious people kill people. But yeah, she threw that one away. She said that was inappropriate given my line of work.
Was it inappropriate or was it extreme?
It was advertising. I could have written that down as an advertising expense.
Allen Analytics. Is substance abuse something that has only happened in modern times, or is there precedent for substance abuse in historical society?
Well, it depends on what you mean by abuse exactly. I'm thinking about ancient Greeks and Rome, and I mean, it would a group of 180 people getting so completely smashed that they're staying up and not sleeping for 2 days and all having sex with each other, gorging themselves. Is that abuse?
Was that happening? That sounds like a good time.
Well, I mean, like
Mystic times of Grecian
in the
society.
Neolithic. I mean, in the Neolithic, 10,000 years ago, as the movement toward agriculture and sedimentation occurred, feasting became a little more crazy than it was with hunter-gatherers. But is it abuse?
I mean, I think that question has always been it's been interesting because it's always kind of been one that cuts straight to a lot of the debates as to how we treat drugs legally. Because I think that the idea of drug abuse itself is one that's very social in nature. So, the idea of having an addiction, right, is really defined by the impact it has on your social life. So if you cannot interact effectively socially with other individuals, your use of some substance is now considered a problem, and if you don't stop it, you're considered an addict. In the past, and in the present, and I think this is one of the things we forget, and in the present, certain drug use is done in a way that is very social, and you can see the attenuating effects of the sociality of its use, right? So alcohol is far more dangerous, both from a social impact, a financial impact, and almost any other way that you can measure it, than any other controlled substance in the Western world, right? When you measure this and you do the studies, alcohol usually comes up with cigarettes as the top 2 problematic drugs in our society. But they're completely legal in almost every Western society throughout history, with exceptions of prohibition, which worked out so great. So with the exception of a few blips of idiocy, it's always been legal. And one of the reasons for that is that there's a social context for drinking. We have spaces where it's considered okay to drink. And in the US, that's physically demarcated. In Europe, it's not so physical, right? Like, people drinking in public in the United States, you will be arrested. You drink in a bar, you're fine. In Europe, you drink in a bar, you're fine. Your kids are probably in the bar. That's a big difference in Europe too. My son is 6. We bring him to bars all the time, and his friends are often at the bar too. So he plays with his friends at the bar. I play with my friends at the bar. It's all good. And in Europe, that's very common, right? There's not a dark demarcation that the bar or the pub is not a space for families. In the US, that's considered it's this taboo. You don't bring your kids. You literally can't even get in without an ID that says you're over 21. There's no wine at home. So it's a really weird socially constructed demarcation that we utilize in our societies that is not universal. What does appear to be universal, though, is the fact that once you have a social context that is socially agreed upon in your society, that doing it in that way creates a boundary that makes it more acceptable, and kind of socially attenuates any extreme behavior, like an addiction. Or how it leads to criminality. So when you look at drugs that are taken communally, that community aspect of it often attenuates any potential addiction or other social issues. So marijuana in the United States is definitely a perfect example of this. There's even very much rituals about the communal use of marijuana, right? You pass in a certain direction, everyone gets their turn, don't bogart the joint. There's all these different aspects to it that are kind of unspoken or spoken. And when new people who've never used the drug before, like, oh, this is this guy's first time smoking weed, like a lot of times there's kind of like, more than one person is there. It's not usually one dude who like lets you hit it. Like, particularly when I was at the University of Vermont, there was very much like a communal thing of like, oh, this guy's never smoked before, but he's decided he wants to try it. You create like a safe space for the guy. Like, okay, well, here's the thing. This isn't your beer. Like, this is going to be a little different, and particularly in Vermont, it was a little stronger than some of the stuff he might have gotten in, his swag town in Rhode Island or whatever. So, yeah, Rhode Island burns. Those are the best. That's not true. That's not true. Colorado burns and New Jersey burns. So that's easy targets. No, definitely. I think that because there's a social context around the use of marijuana, it's very much a safe drug, and a lot of the data is bearing that out. To the extent that other hallucinogens, right, like shrooms, for example, are being used communally, it also creates a safe space for that has social boundaries, and it the issues like how often.
And another factor here that really another factor that complements what you're saying, Justin, is all the literature on the role of connection in social and substance abuse, because often it's the lack of connection. I'd like to put it negatively, what you were just saying, say it the other way around. It's the lack of connection and the use of substances that can lead to what we would call abuse. But if you're able to connect and you feel connected, then you're not likely, your use of substances is not likely to become abusive, because the abuse itself often is a way of taking care of that feeling of not being connected.
And I think that
how does that fit into opium dens?
Yeah, so I think that's one of those things, right? Is in an opium den, and it's 1980s and 90s equivalent, like the crack house. Is that a place that is socially demarcated, or is that a place that is socially excluded? Right? Those places, there's like this boundary, right? So you could use to use the words that I hate and the scholars that I love to hate on, there's a liminal boundary. There's a liminal boundary between the socially acceptable world and the world that we remove by demarcating something like a crack house or an opium den that will allow that to occur in a negative way, because there's not actually social feedback in the way that there is in a pub. And I think that is a good example, is one of the reasons underlying why alcoholism is a bigger issue in the United States than it is in Europe. It's not that there's less people drinking, quite the contrary. Europeans are drinking and they're drinking more. But a lot of the social repercussions and addiction issues that come out of it are bigger in the US, and I think it's because it's a harder boundary between the socially acceptable use and the society at large. And because it demarcates it, there's not enough people giving feedback, right? They're censoring their behavior from society. And censoring behavior from society is a huge indicator of addictive behavior, right? Like, addicts don't want other people to know they're addicts. They don't want other people to know they have a problem. But socially, if we say, if you use X, you have a problem, so therefore we will socially censor you through norms or laws, it basically kind of pushes people into a context where addiction is right. And then, of course, once you have someone who's addicted to something, and they're not getting the help that they need, right, they go down to the bottom, and there's nothing more dangerous or extreme than a person who has nothing left to lose. So those people then become ripe for extremism, which is one of the reasons why I think people who become the worst addicts often become the best advocates for sobriety, but they often have to hit rock bottom multiple times, and then they go completely cold turkey. That's the only way they can turn their life around, is to go cold turkey. There's very few people who can go from raging alcoholic to, yeah, I can have a beer every once in a while in the evening and I'm fine. Most of them, like, if they go cold turkey, they go completely cold turkey for the rest of their life, and that's how they have to deal with it. And I think a lot of that is because of the social nature of how we present information about drugs, right? Because opium, that's a stronger drug, right, than your beer. But there are stronger drugs than beer that don't seem to have the same sort of addictive issues. And there are more addictive drugs that don't have the same social issues, right? So like nicotine is extremely addictive. And at the same time, DMT, ayahuasca are extremely potent drugs, right? You are no longer on this plane of existence when you use those drugs. And yet very few people who use those drugs end up having additional drug issues later on. I've actually heard a few stories, they're anecdotal more than I would say they're useful data, where drug users and people with addiction issues have used ayahuasca. That's led to their ultimate sobriety.
Yeah, I have anecdotal. I've heard similar stories, Justin.
And I think that's interesting, right?
Shocks the ego out of its habitual patterns.
Yeah, I mean, neurologically speaking, what it appears DMT does to the brain is it does not, you do not have an ego anymore. Those things, insofar as the Freudian nonsense has a useful term called ego, that doesn't exist when you use that, when you're using that drug. And that is really interesting effect, right? Like, everything about our perception is about our ego, and those people who can get rid of their egos in certain circumstances are more effective at doing certain things, but there's no real way to get rid of the ego outside of rearranging your brain through drug use. So there are places where, given the right time and place, drug use can be super beneficial, not just to an individual, but could be to society as well. And, you know, as I mentioned before, the key link that we've noticed with extremism, like violent extremism and you know, intense forms of racism and religiosity that can lead to harming other people, is this link between your personal identity and the beliefs that define your social identity. So if you could, if substance use is destroying your personal identity when you're having an intense experience, it's unlikely, if not neurologically impossible, for that experience in the moment to lead to extremism. It's only through Charles Manson sort of doctrination that it leads to extremism after the experience.
Exactly. To say it this way, you can't have identity fusion if you've lost your identity.
Yeah.
Or at least if you're holding on to your identity in a different way. If your identity isn't so solid and rigid and something that has to be protected.
It's one of the reasons why normal people don't go to a KKK meeting and come out in the Klan. Like, right? Their personal identity, they look at this and they go, no, this is not me. This is not what I believe. This is not what I do.
Another impact of psychedelics, I mean, at least those that lead to experiences of unity, or a sense of being connected either to nature or all humanity or all living things, is that sort of rather obviously, at least while it's happening, is influencing your in-groupishness. So if you have repeated experiences of you being connected with a far broader than just your group, then that too is going to soften, ameliorate this kind of in-group tightness and willingness to be extreme toward outgroups.
It's interesting because I'm watching the chat specifically on Reddit right now, and as we've been talking about this conversation, as we're talking about drug use and societal acceptance of drug use, like, we've gotten down votes and like people are just kind of like no, and then as you talk about like how addicts can recover and like gain a sense of sobriety, and then we start getting new votes. So like people, it seems they very much don't like the talk of like using drugs, very much do like the talk of sobriety, and very much don't like the talk of like personal identity. At least that's what it seems.
That's interesting.
We had, so a frustrated comment was that the conversation thus far has been that this is all anecdotal. And so like, and I know that the two of you do massive amounts of research in so many different projects, and it's just I could not begin to summarize all that I know that you do. So what do the research studies look like when the research is being done to uncover these types of things? Like how is that studied?
So the first thing to mention is that it's done kicking and screaming by institutions that are allowing it, because a lot of drugs that are being studied that are currently under Schedule 1, by being put under Schedule 1, you have already made the claim that it has no medicinal benefit. So that makes it very difficult to then get it through an ethical review board at a research institution to say, we're going to study its medical benefits. Because legally, they've already decided, well, it has no medical benefits. So there's a lot of issues with studying Schedule 1 drugs, particularly in the US, where most medical research happens. The overwhelming majority of medical research is happening in the US. A lot of this research had to happen in places like the Netherlands, in places where they have more relaxed IRBs or relaxed drug laws. And other times they do it, kind of on the sly. So, one of the most famous bits of research on this happened actually just outside of my old office at Boston University in the Marsh Chapel, where they gave a bunch of students acid and had them go to a Good Friday church meeting.
Chapel.
Yeah, they had them go to the chapel on acid, and of the individuals that went in, 90% of them reported 40 years later that it was the most intense religious experience they ever had. Almost all of them were still religious, and most of them were very involved or leaders in their religious communities, and a lot of them attribute that experience to or their current status to that experience. Only one of them was not religious 40 years later. And so it that became, an issue that had been brought before Congress years after it happened, right? Because it was the use of a Schedule 1 drug, in a research setting, at Harvard University, that had become a big issue. So the research is not, it's a little bit more open now. Like Johns Hopkins University has been doing a lot of interesting research on this in the last few years, and so they've been getting it, but it's very controlled, it's very white lab code, which I personally think is an issue. There's always an issue in research called ecological validity, right? How, when you move your results from the white lab coat sterilized room into the real world, how well do those translate? And one of the reasons we like to use simulation is because we can start to recreate the real world and better understand how some of these effects can interact with the environment that in ways that lab research sometimes doesn't allow for. But a lot of times we're reliant on like field researchers who are doing, crazy experiments with people on, in the real world, like on the ground. And that is almost never done in the drug research world. And in the drug research and religion world, there's a lot of opportunities for it. Anthropologists are doing it, but they're not very good at data collection or psychological theory engagement. So that becomes an issue because there's no bridge between this massive amount of anthropological literature on the one hand that has vigorously studied, hallucinogenics and drug use in different cultures throughout the world, and then on the other hand, the psychological theories that are being used in the medical community in order to understand the effects of those drugs. There's a real disconnect there.
I have a question that may take it off topic a little bit. Is that okay?
Sure.
You talked about ego.
This whole space is off topic.
You made a claim that drugs may be the only experience that could help break you from your ego. So like my question is in regards to like the psychology around humility, right? That like humility, like it's confusing because there's words like humiliated, which are rooted in the same, right? Which humiliation, we think that's a very negative thing, like a very like self-deprecating thing. But like I've come to learn over the past week that like humility actually means that you have so much confidence in who you are and your relation with the rest of the world and other people that yourself dissolves, right? And you can make like really great progresses in life and understanding of nature and of other people and your relationships by like actively practicing humility, where like people may think that like experiences to dissolve your ego or experiences to become humble have to be these like self-deprecating experiences. So yeah, I just like to hear y'all's perspective on like how we can maybe redefine some of the terminology, or like what strategies we could have to like help people have these like truly humiliating experiences that like they're not embarrassing experiences, they're actually empowering experiences, like drug experiences, like how we could bring that into like everyday life.
Yeah, I think so. Like the word, if I'm not mistaken, the word humility has a Latin root that for the word that means earth or ground,
Of
right?
course, you know this
And
offhand.
so Latin was my language for undergraduate, Latin and ancient Greek. So hooray, utility. Um, but if I'm not mistaken, it's humus, which is
Hmm.
the Latin word for ground or earth, right? So basically, right, if you're humiliated, you're grounded,
Mm.
right? And a lot of times, the word humiliated has this negative connotation, I think, because the idea is that you've been knocked down. And I think that we can reframe it by understanding what it is that grounds us as people. If grounded means you've hit the bottom because somebody hurt your ego or because you made a mistake, then that would be a negative thing. But if you're humiliated or you gain a sense of humility because you've reached your ground, because maybe you were out of line, I think that is actually really useful. And I think that, back again to, coming back to the idea of community in the use of drugs. I think personally, the way that I approach things from both a research perspective and I try to do it as a personal perspective is understanding that what grounds us as people is our social fabric, right? The social fabric is really the space-time continuum that we stand on as individuals. But as individuals, it doesn't exist without the people next to us, right? So we have certain choices we make as individuals within these communities, and they affect the communities, and the communities affect us. So if we're going to be humiliated, we're going to have to return to an understanding that's less about ego and more about ecology, right? So this like shift from ego to eco. Understand that we exist in a social ecology that we call, a community, and that can be a very grounding effect to a more and it kind of then you can go down the rabbit hole, I think, and drug use can help this in a positive way, which is to understand that within that social community we are further grounded in a very real biological ecology, right? Which is difficult for a lot of people, but in an increasingly secular world, people are still looking for something spiritual, right? They still want something greater than themselves. And I think that if we understand the sense of humility, we can understand that the thing that we're looking for is not actually greater than ourselves, it's under our feet, right? The thing that is greater than us is what's grounding us, and it's our community, and it's our planet, it's our ecology that we exist in, both biologically and socially. And there are instances where drug use can help that. I mean, when you raise your glass and you cheers to a good friend that you haven't seen in a long time, that's a grounding experience of drug use, right? You don't think of it that way. You think of it like, hey, let's have a beer together. But in a sense, that is a grounding experience of drug use. If you laugh because your buddy, can't roll a joint or something like that, and you have a good time and you pass it around, you watch some Planet Earth, you've grounded yourself on 2 levels now. And so these are experiences that I think we can, everyone can kind of have. And when it's done in the right social context with the right intention, it can actually be a really beautiful thing where the key to it is humility. It's grounding yourself, but you got to understand where your feet stand. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And from a research and anecdotal perspective, a lot of the differences that people have attributed to the difference between a good trip and a bad trip, for example, in the use of acid, is the context, right? If you don't have a good context, if you're not in a good space mentally and oftentimes physically, it can trigger really negative experiences. And part of that, I think, is because there's not a lot of grounding, right? And I mean, the stoner will say you're harshing my buzz, but the fact is that there's someone who's messing up your connection to community, right? And they're messing up your grounding. And usually the guy who's harshing your buzz is doing it because he is not being very humble. He doesn't have the humility. He's not being a grounded person. And so there are contexts where I think, it's part of, I think humility is very much, from maybe a more spiritual aspect, a key aspect to safe drug use and community building in the modern era, even outside of religion, even in a secular way. And
Uh, I'd just like to point out that you said you immediately called out humility as being Latin and in root, and also being of the earth, and I'm like looking at this thing, it's verbatim. So Latin is your language. I think context. I'm glad that you called out context, because like anecdotally, the context of your trip kind of dictates your trip to a degree. The thing that got me thinking of is like when y- it's interesting how you can approach it from both angles. So, post trip, us speaking here, having had experiences previously, speaking of them in the past tense, largely of like this is what can be gained from it. Speaking of it in the future tense in terms of research and kind of what can be done with it, versus someone saying like, I want insert drug, um,
Mhm.
and then coming up with the intention after the fact. So kind of it seems that the time, like the ordering
Ego
in which you're
problem.
having the conversation, and the intention, right? Like I
Hmm.
want a drug and I want to have a good trip. Well, you started with I want the drug, so the intention of like what the trip is going to be is secondary.
Secondary.
So how
Yeah.
do what questions can someone be asking themselves if they want to ground themselves? And if someone is not grounded in the context of extremism, how can they be brought to ground of their own accord?
I think it's difficult. I also think, though, that what you brought up here touches on a lot of the reasons for some of the downvotes during certain phases of this conversation, right? Which is the very real scientific fact of physical addiction, right? There are properties of these substances that activate certain evolved capacities of our bodies, that make them very dangerous substances in certain circumstances because they do have physically addictive properties. Um, we've largely, of course, stayed towards, the use of like more natural drugs. We've spoken a lot about shrooms, ayahuasca came in, a lot about alcohol, a lot about weed. These don't have a lot of physically addicting effects. But things like opiates, which did come up for a bit, there's also, heroin as well. These have physically addicting properties, right? Where you can have that feeling of like, oh, I need this drug. And then you take it, and then you do a post hoc justification as to why you took it. And what you're doing at that point is excusing your behavior. You were doing that not out of humility, but out of ego. And you were excusing your behavior after the fact. So that can be part of it. I mean, and that's very dangerous. And there is a case to be made there, um, for what's going on. And looking at what's going on in the U.S. today with the epidemic of opiate use. I mean, it's not, that's no longer an anecdote, right? The data shows that opiates are contributing to a decrease in average lifespan at a national level for several years now, right? We're bucking the trend, and it's largely because of suicide and opiate use. And a lot of that is because opiates those are not drugs that are designed for social use. Those are designed to be treatments for particular physical ailments, and people are using them in not necessarily in social settings, right? There's not a lot of people who are taking opiates in a group. They'll take opiates and then go to a party. They'll go to a group. Those people are doing it in the shadows because they know that it's something that's frowned upon, and if their friends and family knew they had an issue, that there would be an issue there, right? And I mean, in my family, I have someone who's, basically he's my younger brother, and then my best friend growing up from, we've known each other since the age of 3, and we still talk almost every day now. We went through a period where we didn't speak for several years, and part of it I thought was just the distance, right? I had moved to another part of the country, and he was still living back in Maryland. But it turns out that he actually was having a huge struggle with drug addiction that I knew, I kind of picked up something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. And a lot of it was, he was not being open with anyone in his social network about his opiate use. And the same for the guy who's very close with my family. He's now been sober for several years and has really turned his life around. He's even helped to, get people through halfway houses and sponsor other people in sobriety and stuff. But when he was called out for his use, it immediately became like, I don't have a problem. It was like, they fire right back at you in a way that you don't see that with a lot of other drugs. And I think a lot of that has to do with the physical addiction aspects of it. But a lot of it also has to do with the fact that they know that what they're doing is not socially acceptable. Like, they do know that.
We had a remark which I think has been covered from chat, but talking about parents that use drugs and kind of ruined their childhood in turn. But the comment that followed was about explaining how all things can be both good and bad in balance, which I think we kind of covered with the notion of context and intention. And it's interesting to have this conversation because as we have it, we're kind of like we're talking about it in past tense and in future tense. We're talking about it through personal and subjective experience, but then also, I would say objective societal simulation with AI. I say objective in my personal opinion of objective. But I'm sure other people might have thoughts. So it's interesting. Do you find that talking about drugs and religion is a similar conversation in that when you're trying to draw conclusions and help to craft the worldviews of others, for example, when you're doing de-radicalization work with governments or when you're placing refugees, you're communicating this modality of thinking of like, okay, so we see these things, we understand these things, and with this understanding, we understand that we can enact change. Inherently, the people that you're speaking to have to believe you in order to do it.
Yeah.
So do you find difficulty in that step between communicating like the understanding in the manner which you've gotten to it and the implementation?
Yes. Hugely difficult. And I think it's lots of reasons why it's so difficult. And some of them are very personal for people. Like Justin said, maybe they have a family member or a parent who's been addicted and there's been abuse. I mean, not just of the drug, but of other people. So I think it's important to say, or at least I, at any rate, am not promoting even the use of substances. But for some people, that can be helpful in certain contexts. But you don't need substances. You can achieve, if I can say, altered states, or you can achieve states of dissolving the ego and the anxiety, and of dissolving the need to be connected to your in-group in a certain way, in other ways, through meditation, through mindfulness, through breathing techniques, through drumming techniques. It doesn't necessarily require substances. And for some people, I completely understand why they would be resistant.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you. I like drugs, but I like Laurent too. I like that.
Talk about things we need on a t-shirt. I like Laurent too.
I heard someone speak on, I think it was like Tim Ferriss's podcast years ago at this point, and he was talking about how he was very much a psychonaut and just did loads of hallucinogens, and he didn't
Was this Sam Harris?
It might have been Sam Harris. I can't remember who it was, but he wrote it. He wrote like a really well-known article about drugs, and he talks about how he doesn't advocate for his daughter to do drugs. This was again years ago, but he's like he would be really upset if he found out that she turned 21 and hadn't had a psychedelic.
That was Sam Harris. Sam Harris.
Okay. The thing that was really interesting for me is that he said that he stopped doing psychedelics because he just didn't find that he needed them anymore, and instead he found a way to connect with that state in a meditative state. And he's like, however, it took me years of practice and solitude and going into the wilderness, but with a psychedelic drug, you take the ticket, you go for a ride. And so there's people who are putting in years of work to be able to get to a psychedelic state without psychedelics why did they do that? Is it because they had a psychedelic experience and they saw that to be possible and they wanted to get there without the psychedelics? Or did they hear about the psychedelic experience and just from hearing about it and never having their own, put in years of work to get to that place? And I would assume it's more the latter, or the former than the latter.
So it's an interesting question, right? I think there's two levels to approach it. One of them, of course, is like the historical one, right? Looking at humanity generally and those people who have engaged in meditative experiences like that for the last 2,000 years in particular, right? Have been people who are professionally religious, right? They existed in a socioeconomic niche where their job was to be religious, right? Monks and nuns. They were the ones who had the time to dedicate to cultivate the ability to meditate at that level. I don't think that this approach towards meditation, started with Buddhism or Hinduism or anything like that. I think it probably, goes back to, the dawn of civilization itself. As the moment that there became a niche for religiosity, some guy realized that when he was sitting alone praying long enough, that it had an effect like some of the drugs that they probably had in their societies. And we've had drugs as long as we've had societies. So I think that part of that is, the people who have the time to dedicate to meditation practice at that level have either been in societies that have been, they're people who have been in societies that have been able to support them as appendages of the society. Right? They can remove themselves from the socioeconomic daily workings, or they find a new niche in the socioeconomic daily workings that can allow for them to do that. Right? The idea of the vow of poverty in Buddhism is entirely reliant on the community to now feed you. Right? So only so many people can take a vow of poverty, because eventually there's too many people eating rice and not enough people growing, and you have a free rider issue. So on the one extent, there's that. On the other extent, though, there is the more modern instantiation of this, right? The people like Sam Harris's, the people like, the common, the big thing in the Silicon Valley tech world, is this new age kind of spirituality that's existed in California for decades. But those people are also, they have the time and they have the motivation to dedicate the time to reaching those states of consciousness through meditative practice. But that takes a very long period of time. I mean, if you notice, most of the people who say that that's one of the reasons they meditate are also still using drugs. Microdosing is still extremely popular. The use of marijuana is extremely popular. And I think the reason is because they actually can't get there through meditation. They're meditating because it has other health benefits, and that's probably why they still do it. But the ability for them to actually turn into, and reach like the alpha wave state that's been recorded in Buddhist monks that have been meditating for 20, 30 years. Jack Dorsey can't do that, right? He's been running Twitter, he's been running Stripe. He's too busy censoring the world to actually meditate and do some good for himself. So he's going to have to rely on other ways of doing it, like only eating once a day, which food deprivation is another way of reaching his ultimate state of consciousness. So I think that, a lot of people are doing it through other means, even though they're saying that they want to try it and do it through meditation. But meditation's a very real way of doing that. They've documented that pretty solidly in the studies that have used meditation with meditation experts.
All right, I'm going to bring up indigenous knowledge now. I'm not an expert, but I've heard some things. And a lot of what I've heard from a lot of indigenous cultures is that they have a lot of practices of mindfulness, like baked into their language, baked into their daily regular interactions with other people and with nature. So the example, like in Hawaiian language, I'm most familiar with Hawaiian history and Hawaiian culture. The word aloha, and I might have explained this to y'all, but the word aloha means aloha. It changes into English to exchange of breath. Your ha is your breath is your soul. And so when you say hello, goodbye, I love you, what's up to anybody, you're saying aloha, you're like exchanging your breath with them. And breath is your soul, and Being aware of your soul, being aware of your breath, just like meditation, is mindfulness. So it's like there's like these like regular daily practices of how you interact with people where you're just like humbling yourself, having an act of humility. And I think that there's a lot to be learned from that. I'm always bringing that to the conversations here.
Yeah. I think there definitely is, right? In Navajo culture, for example, there are specific words that basically mean social responsibility, right? I've heard, I don't speak DNA, I don't know, but Brian, that's not one of the languages I study. But my understanding is that they don't have a word that is like the equivalent of the English word for "I'm sorry." There's just like an understanding of this is what you're socially supposed to do, right? That you're supposed to be socially mindful of the other people around you. And I think part of that comes from the fact that life in indigenous cultures is premised on the social relationship. There's a brilliant book written called, what was it? The World Until Tomorrow?
Until yesterday.
Until Yesterday, The World Until Yesterday, by Jared Diamond, who's one of my favorite, I love-hate relationship, but that book is one of my favorite books because he raises the question of what can modern societies do to learn from indigenous cultures. And their legal and social structures. And one of the things that kept repeating in the book is how indigenous cultures regularly view ideas of sociality very differently than we do in the modern world. And something that really stuck out to me had to do with the idea of social transgressions, right? And like when somebody does something wrong, in the American system, when somebody does something wrong, the state punishes you, right? If you steal from me, the state prosecutes you because you broke the state's law. It's like, well, fuck that. You didn't steal from the state. You stole from me.
Yeah.
Like,
And
the injustice was done to me. Yeah, and they pay the fine to the state, or they do their time to the state. They don't pay the fine to me. I was the one who was wronged. In indigenous cultures, the idea of the state does not exist, right? That was imposed on them largely because somebody had to sign the treaty, right? So they kind of like this ad hoc idea kind of arose, and was forced upon them in order to negotiate in the modern era. But in indigenous cultures, when you have a transgression against a person, usually the community in some shape or form comes together to right that wrong and rebuild that social relationship because they understand that what was broken was the social relationship, not between that individual and the group, right? The guy didn't steal from the group. And if he did, typically you're exiled, right? And exile in most cultures until about 500 years ago was a death sentence. So if you commit a crime against the group in an indigenous culture, you're exiled and you're dead. If you commit a crime against a person, you have to mend the relationship with that person. And in the Western world, we don't have that sort of sense. And I think that part of it does come from a cultural mindset that is even embedded linguistically in a lot of indigenous cultures, of a mindfulness of, that social fabric that we increasingly don't have. The word, when was Bowling Alone written? Bowling Alone was written in like 1970s, 1980s?
Which book again, Dustin?
Bowling Alone.
Oh, yeah. Or early 80s, maybe?
Yeah, I think it was in the 80s, Bowling Alone, right? And it documents how in American society we're no longer engaging in civic groups, right? The idea of like PTA meeting attendance had gone down, church attendance had started going down, religious attendances across the board were starting to go down. People bowling in bowling leagues, right, were starting to go down, and that gave the title of the book, Bowling Alone. Is the idea is that people engaging in social groups in a community, a real community, right, not this Facebook bullshit, but in a real community, had started to degrade well before social media. And then social media took this cultural vacuum that exists at an evolutionary level for us, this need to be in a society, and gave us the hallmark version of a social relationship, right? The quick buy it for 50 cents version of a friendship where you're linked on a social network, which is totally meaningless, and then you can get reinforced that you have a relationship through like bullshit social signals like likes and shares and things like this, and it makes you feel like you're famous and stuff like that, but in reality you know nothing about that other person's life. You don't really care about that person's life. The only reason you know anyone's birthday anymore is because Facebook tells you that it's somebody's birthday, right? I have very few people I say happy birthday to, and it's not because I don't like them, it's just because I don't know when your birthday is. And like I have some birthdays in my calendar. I try and write down everyone's birthday because I don't, do the Facebook posting thing like most people do.
HBD, bro.
HBD. So like I have a birthday message I need to send to my friend Joe today because his birthday is here. And like I know it because my phone told me. I still am not good at remembering birthdays. I remember like very few like close family relations are about all I can remember, right? And that's all you need to remember. Who gives a crap about a happy birthday?
Have you
a guy you haven't spoken to since high school?
Yeah. Elise, have you heard the phrase collective effervescence?
No.
This is one of my favorite phrases from Emil Durkheim, one of the early sociologists. So, and it has to do with the structure of early societies as opposed to modern societies, the way Justin's describing. So, effervescence is like this bubbling up. So, Durkheim's idea was that when you have the small-scale societies in which human brains evolved, and most humans have lived their whole lives, and so we still long for that, you have the group. Out of the group's interaction, an emotional energy emerges and then sort of falls back into the individual. So the individual gets emotional energy as the group, something bubbles out of the group. And that is how he understood religion. So this sort of sense of the group's identity connected to a supernatural agent. It might be ancestors or an animal spirit or eventually gods of some kind. But the group, by their interaction and their social networking, that emotional energy kind of bubbled up and it created the identity of the group. So you feel good. You have this emotional energy being connected to the people around you. You're not sending them likes. You're actually interacting with them regularly. But now, my colleague Kevin McCaffrey and I, we have submitted a paper called an article called "Distributive Effervescence." Which is a phrase that we're trying to use to describe actually what Justin was pointing to here. Justin, I don't know if I've even talked to you about this.
I did not know you guys were doing this.
Yeah. So the idea here is that humans need emotional energy, but now the social network, it's not that I have a small group of around 180 to 120 people that I pretty much know everyone, and they're all watching me, and I get my emotional energy from interacting with them face to face, but it's distributed. I get some emotional energy from watching cat videos. I get some from doing this every other week. I get some from meeting with my colleagues. So like from wine club or going swimming or whatever it is, you get your emotional energy, and the effervescence is distributed. So the question is, I don't think we're ever going to put the genie of distributive, capitalistic, wide social scale societies back into the bottle and go back to small groups hunting and gathering. I think unless there's a major crisis and death of billions of people, but that's another thing. The question is, how can we promote safe sex, right, Brian? The topic of how can we promote ways of being in groups that are safe within differentiated social structures in which effervescence is distributive, but still get the pleasurable and grounding energy that we need in our human brains with enough social connection that it's healthy and we don't end up going to extremes because we feel isolated.
Yeah. Is that like, how do you do that through like reminders for cultural exchange between groups, but then like a lot like cultural exchange programs?
So I think that this is one of the ways where social networks could be leveraged in interesting ways, right? We naturally tend to cluster into smaller group units, right? Even, this is like 6 degrees of separation stuff. We've known this for decades now, that even in a society of millions, there are sub-societies and subcultures that exist, right? So there are discernible pockets of groups that kind of do that. And in the modern world, we have new ways of collecting and defining that group, because we have WhatsApp groups, we have meetups, we have Reddit, right? And so there are ways in which we could leverage these technologies to actually integrate and interact in the real world by creating sort of almost like a cultural exchange, but like, group exchanges between the subgroups, right? So like potlucks are something that, back to indigenous culture, right? That's where this idea comes from the potlatch in the Northwest Pacific area. Where you have a group or a particularly wealthy person who decides to sponsor a feast, and who doesn't like having some food and drinking, having a couple of smokes and talking about things and bringing people together. Everyone likes that. And you can do it with wider communities, right? It doesn't just have to be in your group. You can invite the church next door, or the synagogue next door, or the subreddit over there, or the meetup group from the next town. And so there's a lot of ways where we've clustered ourselves by interest group, but we haven't started to cluster ourselves in the real world. And it's created a lot of danger. So I think we can kind of leverage that to recreate, new cultural exchanges. And it kind of reminds me when I was at Oxford, they have each college, right? There's 36 colleges at the university, and they're very insular, right? They're protected by like castle walls. You never have to leave these things. They're wild. They've got their own dining halls. It's like everyone's got their own Hogwarts that they're part of, basically, right? And inside of each one of the Hogwarts, they do have these common rooms, right? You've got your Slytherin, your Ravenclaw, your Hufflepuff. You've got this sort of, like, it's basically the same social structure. But one of the things that happens is that they have these college exchanges where you'll go and do dinner and drinks with another college so that you can meet them and mingle with them and share ideas and have discussions and this sort of thing. And it's exactly the same thing. You invite them, and then they invite you, and you have this dinner, and the dinner is very ritualized. And then you go to the bar. Every college has its own bar as well. And so then you go to the bar and you drink, and be merry, have fun, that sort of a thing. And it's a really interesting cultural exchange. I mean, I know people who have met their spouses at those events, right? People who go and do it, and it was like a big thing. Like my wife and I used to do it when we were there. She was at a different college than I was. And so we would all kind of go to the different college exchanges because it was a really interesting thing. And it was unique, right? It broke you out of your usual social bubble. It got you engaged in a social way, and there was a lot of fun and exchange of ideas and exchange of stories, and really meeting people on a very human level that was happening, that I think is really good. And we're losing a lot of that, and we're trying to recreate it and make it artificial, but there's certain things that you can't do artificially, and sociality is one of them. Like having a very real connection with someone doesn't happen through the computer box here. Like I think that a year and a half of Zooming with everyone has demonstrated that at a global scale, that there has been an undeniable breakdown in social ties, not just between regular people and loved ones, but between entire communities. And the fact that we're treating social media, which is now just an ideological war zone, as an artificial, as a substitute to our sociality, is, I think, the most dangerous thing in the last 20 or 30 years.
Good point, Justin.
Is now we're going to, and then what? We're going to reopen our societies coming out of this COVID, because we're going to reopen society, right? And either it's because we get through the vaccinations and it's people in power deem it safe enough to go back outside, or we stop caring, and we've already started to stop caring. So we better get through these decisions quickly, because people are going to stop listening to them very quickly. And once they get to that point, society is going to be reopened. We're going to be meeting each other again in the real world. But we've come out of a year and a half of intellectual war zone, where all we've had is our little tethered phones, where they're just giving us all of these alerts about who said something stupid on the internet, dialing us up. We have the propaganda machines going right into our pockets 24/7, from MSNBC's bullshit, the Fox's bullshit, and all of this stuff trying to rile us up and act like there's not a bunch of idiots running this society. And so we're riled up on our own tribe, and they're going to release us out into the wild? Man, we've been in the zoo. We're not ready for the wild. And part of it, it's our fault. It's our fault, because we're the ones who haven't been getting that right social experience, right? And now they're going to, we've basically been, out into the wild, and now this new lockdown, half lockdown with the mask wearing, we're on the game reserve. But if they like let us back out into the wild, man, I don't know what's gonna happen here. It's a very interesting social experiment, but it's a social experiment that they're flying into real blind. And I think social media, I don't know. I think it's hard to deny that social media is doing a lot of bad for society.
Can I give you an analogy, Tess? I don't want to distract us too far, but I just thought of an analogy. Yvonne, whom you know, one of the researchers
One
here,
of the programmers, yeah.
his girlfriend in France is doing research on giant hamsters in France, and they're yeah.
Really? I didn't know that she was doing that.
But the problem is they're close to going extinct, so they're trying to. They're breeding them and trying to get them used to taking them into the wild, but it's not working so far because the problem is they'll stuff a fox, like take a taxidermic fox, and then they'll like with this. I know. I'm not promoting the research design, Justin. This is an analogy to what you just said. And they stick the fox into the area where the hamsters are, and the hamsters attack the fox, jump on the fox's face, and attack the fake fox. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, just like us, here we are. They're trying to preserve us in this social cage, and they're sticking foxes. MSNBC, Fox.
Yeah.
The Fox. Now we're like, attack the fox, and then they're going to put us in the wild, and how's that going to work?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I mean, there's a certain point, right, where the extremes have now they're flying a flag that's no longer communal. And then there's people in the middle who are just so fed up with the extremes that there's not a lot of cohesion, right? There's basically, there's kind of like three groups. And the one group in the middle is becoming increasingly more vocal of like, the parents in the room who like don't show up that often, but then they come in and they're like, quiet down or you're grounded. And, now they're about to try and dole out some punishment. It's like the parents, the moderates in our society have been quiet for like decades. And they've not said anything, and now these extremes are going nuts, and now they're coming in and acting like they got authority, and the extremes are just going to be like, you're not my real dad, and they're going to go nuts, because there's been no presence of moderation in our society for decades, and social media has put extremism on steroids. I don't know if you guys saw this, but there was an internal study done at Facebook about extremism on Facebook. And when it was presented to Zuckerberg and friends that Facebook was increasing extremism and radicalization on their platform, they shut down the study. Like, they're the largest social network in history. They keep complaining about, we need to censor all these people because of radicalization and all this shit. And they keep promoting radicalization on their platform algorithmically. And then they're like, we need to do something about it. And so they study it. And then when they realize that they're the fucking problem, they shut down the study because they don't want to deal with it. And it's like, could you be the ostrich with your head in the sand and your ass in the air any more than what you saw right there? This is the same company that did algorithmic manipulation of the emotions of millions of people without their consent, and they're wondering why they're the problem and then can't face it. It's like, dude, the demon in your mirror is rough, and it's going to come at you hard.
It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it.
Oh, nice.
That's true. It's even more difficult when he fully understands it and just denies it. That, I think, is the issue. Is they're not dumb. Zuckerberg's not an idiot. He fully understands it. But he just doesn't give a shit because of his power.
It's a shareholder issue. Because if they continued the study and let that come to light, then it would have damaged the stock price because it would have acknowledged that they had a problem, which would mean they'd need to invest lots of money to try and find a solution to the problem. But then the thing is that, okay, if that made light and continued, stock price would go down, shareholders would demand that they invest in a solution. And so basically what's happening is that they're hearing the study, they're hearing that like, oh wow, we're the problem. And they imagine the fear of the stock price shooting down, shareholders being upset, but the fear prevents them from seeing what happens on the other side of the dip. Right, like the dip gives like, oh wow, we have this new learning, we spend money, we make it better, we prevent this thing, it could go a different direction. And so they just cut it off and they're like, nope, we're gonna bury it, we're gonna stick our head under the sand, it doesn't exist. Versus like, oh man, this is alarming, and we acknowledge this, and it's gonna be a process to change and evolve, but like if we commit to it, we can do it. It's like literally just acknowledging versus burying. And I don't know, maybe it's seems too insurmountable that all of their cognitive biases are like, no, we're just gonna pretend it doesn't exist. It worked for Billy McBride and Fire Festival, so it's gonna work for us. I don't know.
So I don't think so. So when you look at what happened already when they had an issue of extremism and misinformation and manipulation on the platform there with Facebook, right? You're looking at like the 2016 election with the Russian bots that were going around. And that's the sort of stuff that's still happening. Like, I don't know if anyone else has been paying attention to what's been going on with like the Chinese manipulation of our media. If you think that what the Russians was doing was big, this is orders of magnitude larger coming out of what the CCP is doing. And they're not just doing it on Facebook, they're also doing it in print media, right? And they know this. Like, there's financial records from the Washington Post that show that they've been paid millions in order to run specific pro-CCP Communist Party of China articles for years. But when you look at what happened with Facebook, look at its 2016 stock price all the way up to 2018, 2020, like, they did not, it was a straight line going up. They did not give a crap about the social instability and the rise in extremism and all that stuff on their platform. When you look at what's been going on since 2021, this whole thing of like what was going on in January, February 2021, basically kind of flatlined. It's up way more in what is it? So before the January 6th riots, it was $273 a share. It's now $358 a share. So the Facebook investors don't give a crap about this. They care. Just keep clicking. Keep that revenue coming, keep it going. Mm-hmm. When you look at when the information came out that they had, in my opinion, totally unethically manipulated tons of people, stock price kept on going up. That's not something that the investors in Facebook really care about, and it's not something obviously that Facebook cares about because they keep doing it. Instead of actually addressing extremism, they said, "Oh, we're going to give an extremism badge. You've been exposed to extremist content." Now, I don't know if you keep good track on what third-party like promoting sites are, right? Like people who are in the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, these other sort of parties. They treat that like a Reddit badge. They're looking to get that extremist content badge because they know that the way that you get that is by posting something that pisses off the Facebook community standards. And now they view it as a badge of achievement. Right? It's this idea of like, let's react against it. Let's push back against this within the system. And that in itself is totally artificial, right? It's like, what revolution are you going to win on your Facebook page? Nobody gives a crap about your Facebook battles. Oh, you're going to post against somebody's wrong on the internet. You better stay up late. You better downvote that.
I'd like to share an experience I've been having over the past week on a fast influence growing social media website that y'all aren't so familiar with, on TikTok, which has a completely different discourse mechanism, just the way the UI of the app works and how content creation works. It's like when you want to fight with someone in the comments, you like create new content when you fight with someone. And that content then, and the distribution of that content, the algorithms they use, like you can have a 0 following and get content out because of how the algorithm works. Over this past week, and so it allows people, ultimately what that mechanism does is it allows people to call people out. And that happens like crazy on that website or on that app, where people get called out and then it's like either be held accountable or just continuously more content about you is going to be created by other creators. In this past week, there was a big explosion. Laurent, you brought up safe spaces. How to practice safe sex is how do we create those safe places for people to gather and share, and then for those spaces to expand and intersect with other spaces and help everybody become more humble, right? Humiliate everybody. I'm going to start saying that, like, let's get humiliated. I'm trying to humiliate you.
That's right. Bring it back.
So anyway, what happened was there are a lot of what are now being called like performative activists. And, that's like the last wave of feminists. There's a lot of that there, like white feminism is being criticized a lot because it's ignoring the intersectionality of like other oppressed communities. And it's like only white women have the stage, only white women have the platform to talk. And so a lot of influencers have started to develop followings, like big followings, and even started to speak on issues of like communities that they're not a part of. And the communities, like let's say for instance like the Black community, and especially the Black women, female community, which these feminists are speaking on and speaking on behalf of, like their needs and their experiences, simply because like for the past decade of their activism, like they've been the only people around with a platform. You know, like Black women aren't given that platform, but like TikTok is giving them that platform. Like there still is some suppression for Black creators versus white creators. Like there's a lot of stuff going on in that area of like seeing that suppression, but they still get that platform. And like there were 2 activists that got called out hard, like really bad, and it turned into this big public display, and almost any like activist related creator is creating content around this conflict going on. And I just wanted to share that story with you because I thought that y'all would find that fascinating. Like that TikTok, I know it sucks and it's China and like who knows what's going on there, but just like the UI and the content created, like the cycles of content being created and the discourse that's like just continuously happening on it is really powerful. And so like my question was in regards to the safe places, the safe spaces. So that's what came out, is that like we're trying to talk about like racism and oppression and how to like get everybody to understand these systemic issues, and it's almost as if like what came out of all this drama was that like the Black women said, hey, this is our safe place. Like I, like someone like me, does not have any place in that space, especially speaking in that space. Like maybe I could be there in the corner just listening and like holding space and being humble, but like to be like the voice of, you know, what's being said, you know, and even what's been criticized is someone like the woman that wrote the White Fragility book, which we've talked about before here. Even she got called out that like she's the last person that needs to be talking about this. Like how do we create like the platforms for those safe places to really be cultivated and supported is the question.
I think that one of the considerations there is to create a platform that's not premised on conflict, right? There's always a tension, I think, between progress and conflict. In a way, progress is inherently conflictual, but progress in a positive sense is always made through community consensus, right? And a lot of times conflict feels to the people in the conflict like progress, but it looks to the people outside of the conflict, I think, a bit more for what it is, which is a lot of energy that's being expended but not being focused, and is often being wasted or dissipated. And in cultural discourses, that's particularly the case on social media. TikTok, you know, I still don't use it. I do keep a good eye on like what's going on with TikTok. So some of the TikTok battles, I'm I guess unreasonably familiar with.
Cool.
As you could say. I find it very interesting that TikTok's algorithms work the way that they do, and I was aware that they that in order to create a discourse you have to create more content, right? That's an interesting dynamic. The fact that it kind of promotes this sort of back and forth and that it promotes this call out is interesting, because you are by design promoting the thing that degrades social discourse the most, right? Which is the idea of let's do a pile-on sort of conflict, cancel call out culture approach to an important topic. So when there comes to be like an important topic like the democratization of debates around gender and race, by creating conflict, you drown out the possibility of progress on the larger stage by exerting energy into micro conflicts rather than really addressing the bigger issues, right? Like a lot of the people who should be engaged on these big issues, people like, let's say, thought leaders in the political arena, they're not jumping into your TikTok conflicts, right? Those guys are staying off of it. And in a way, it kind of makes the question of like, well, who's benefiting from this conflict approach to critical social issues? To an extent, it promotes the loudest voices in the room, right? The person who is the loudest, who gets the most responses and upvotes to the algorithm promotes the most, that they get there. But that's how you get your Trumps, right? I mean, that's how we got that guy, was he was the loudest voice in the room. TikTok is also interesting, right? If TikTok is not allowed in China, right? So like Chinese users can't use TikTok, which says a lot about whether or not the Chinese government thinks it's safe for society, right? This is a government that's exclusive issue is control and stability, and they don't allow TikTok in their own country. So it's definitely a big issue there, I think. And when it comes to giving a platform and a voice, on the one hand, TikTok is great because its video promotion allows for certain voices to be heard that wouldn't. And when you think of, feminist performance art, video is a great channel for it. Social media video probably isn't, because a lot of the great feminist performance art is too edgy for most social media. The people who are really making you go, oh shit, those are not the people you're going to be able to see on a social media app. Definitely not one that could be censored either by Silicon Valley or Beijing. So I don't know. It's one of those things. I find it a fascinating thing, though, right? That how do we create not just safe sex, right? But when you need to have progressivism, right? When we need to have progress in a safe sex, how can you harness the discourse that's necessary to create progress, right? A positive progress is a really critical question, right? That adds the dynamic, right? The practice in the practicing safe sex is how can we have progress where you can have all of the voices be heard in a positive way in the group without things going off the rails. And I think the biggest issue that I have with so many of these social media sites is they algorithmically engineer a tendency to go off the rails in an interesting way. So I don't know, maybe I'll have to, I don't think I'll be joining TikTok anytime soon.
Oh no, I don't recommend it. But yeah, keeping up with the discourse, like it's a really great, like really awesome, vulnerable, raw content is being created there. And a lot of it is emotional, but that's discourse, right? And like it's just going to continue, and new content's going to get created, and people's perspectives are going to wind in. You can actually see that evolution in someone's content that they've put out. It's
yeah, that's something I really want to look into on social media. We might have an opportunity for that.
Yeah, this is so interesting, but I'm afraid I have to go. Guys, get ready for my next meeting.
Oh,
thank you, Laurent.
All right, yeah, thanks for a great conversation. It gets funner every other week. Bye-bye.
Every other week.
Funner is a word. Funner is a word.
It is. I think, like, circling back to the idea, right, of the discourse, one of the things that I think is important, also goes back to the idea of humility, right, that you brought up, is when you have positive progress, a lot of social media feels real and it feels progressive, when in reality it's very regressive. And I think a lot of it is because social media promotes the ego, right? It doesn't promote the eco, that ecology, the social ecology, and the biological ecology of our globe, of our planet, that we need to be humble, to be humility. Social media is the anti-humble, right? It's how many likes do I get? How big is my following? How many responses do I get? How many comments do I get? How many hearts and upvotes, does my account have? You don't really look at it as a community in most cases. And I think that's one of the things that's dangerous, is it's a lot of people speaking for communities without being part of that community is a really big issue. And I see this in a lot of the debates on gender and race, like Robin DiAngelo. For a rich white woman, she sure has a lot to say. And it's really interesting to see her say it the way that she does. When it's like, how much money that she's made from the book, White Fragility, has she donated to help the causes that she says is the #1 cause in America? How much of that went into her really, really nice house and cars? Like, yep. It's one of those things where a lot of people are speaking from the position, I think, of ego, and trying to speak for a community. And you touched on the issue of white women dominating the feminist discourse right now, and that's obviously almost interesting in a way, though, right? Because it is ego on the one hand, but it becomes ego really when they start trying to speak for someone else. If they're, there's no reason why anyone shouldn't be part of the debate and progress around feminism. But when it comes to being part of the debate about what other people should do, and you're telling them what to do, then it becomes very egotistical in a way, right? You lose that humility in a lot of ways, because you're kind of off your grounding. And I don't want to say it's like a stay in your lane kind of situation, but at the same point, it kind of is, right? It's, anthropology has had this issue forever. It's like, why are a bunch of white guys going around telling you like what other people think? Like, they can tell you. Like, what's the point of anthropology, right? A historian can do it. A journalist can do it. Most people on the planet are now literate, so like they could just tell you how they feel. They don't need a white guy to go tell them. It's a really useless enterprise as far as most enterprises are concerned. And I think that social media allows other people to have a platform they didn't before, right? Like, how often would a Nigerian feminist be able to have their voice heard by someone in Dallas, Texas, outside of social media? And the answer is like probably not ever going to happen ever. But social media does it. So if you can figure out a way for the algorithms to promote positive debate rather than censorship and ego, and that's when it becomes the tool that Zuckerberg said he was creating and that Dorsey said he was creating. If we actually created that tool, we could do it. But that requires a very different algorithm. You need to incentivize the community, not incentivize the ego. And none of the algorithms on social media are
The biggest irony of TikTok activists content right now, content creators, is that like by far the most popular and best performing topic is on narcissistic relationships and narcissistic partners. And so it's like a bunch of creators just talking about how to identify if your boyfriend's a narcissist, and here's the things he's gonna do, and this explains his behavior, and this is what's going on. And it's like on social media with like all this ego and toxicity and around, it's so ironic. It's like,
it'd be really fascinating, right? So like, if we had transcripts of it, we could see how narcissistic those anti-narcissist videos are. Because we could
that would be so cool.
Right? Like turning the tables on the situation a bit. Because a lot of times, right, some of the most homophobic people are homophobic for a reason. And maybe some of the people who are most anti-narcissists are also the most narcissists. You see it about the same people who like talk about, these people are gaslighting, and gaslighting is sociopathic. It's like they're also the people who seem to be the most gaslighting.
Yeah. On that note, that seems like a whole different area for research, and perhaps should be the topic for the next talk in 2 weeks. But it is exceedingly late here, later where Elise is, and earlier because Justin's in the future. But I think this has been awesome. Rife with a lot of things. Fantastic prompts as per usual, Elise and Justin. I am absolutely not surprised at all that you know the etymology of words that just come up.
Brian, you're going to want to go check out my stream on Reddit, because I tell you what, we've had somebody in chat the entire time from when I first turned the stream on, is called It's Okay, You Can Spank Me. And they've got quite the crush on you, Brian. They're located in Iowa. You should go. They have very nice things to say about you, Brian.
I'm like 5 pixels on the screen.
Brian's already met one.
They said
he's already wiped out, man.
They said I keep clicking the envelope on Brian's to PM.
Wait. What's your
sliding into the DMs?
What's your Utopia, or what's your Reddit handle again?
It's okay, you can spank me.
No, not theirs. Yours.
Oh.
No, it's okay. You can.
Mine says peace, Elise, and the E's at the beginning and the end of the words are the same. Peace, Elise. Yeah. Yeah, the chat's funny. I'm sure they're still here. They haven't commented since I've called them out, but
I like how you laid out the videos.
Yeah, I laid it out. Well, you were hanging out with Bitcoin. Yeah, you're hanging out with Bitcoin over here.
Oh, wait, if I knew that you were zoomed in on my face on your stream, I wouldn't have been flossing midway through.
I didn't. In your defense, I didn't catch it.
I was like trying to lean away. Chantel handed me a flosser and I just reflectively started flossing before I thought about it. But anyway, on that note, thank you for all the kind comments. It's okay, you can spank me. We hope that you tune in 2 weeks. It's okay, you can spank me.
Oh, too much fun.
Amazing. All right. Love you both.
Very good.
Bye-bye. Don't forget Bitcoin.
See ya.
He loves you too.
Bye, Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
Oh man, so much fun every time. Every time. Oh, Bitcoin, what do you think? What do you think? Oh man. Oh, I gotta get out of here. That was a good conversation, huh, Bitcoin? That was a good one. You deserve a treat. You were such a good boy. Spankings, yes. Yes, Don, you walked right in on the spankings. You get a spanking yourself. Oh, Bitcoin's scared of the spankings. No, there was a user on Reddit. I don't know if you're still here. Yes, you can spank me. Are you still here? Yeah, let's get ourselves in position. As always, practicing safe sex is a fun conversation. Super fun. Oh, I'm on a boat. I'm on a boat. I'll stay on the boat. Alright, let me get out of here. I'm hanging out under a tree. Awesome. Yeah, everybody, thank you so much for hanging out. Reddit, I'm going to be tuning out. My name is Elise. I stream here several times a week. You should follow me. If you liked that conversation, if you like tea, you want to learn more about tea, please follow me. Come back to the channel. We hang out all the time. I do also stream to Twitch. You can get there at tlet.tv. I'll actually put it in the chat. But this series called Practicing Safe Sex happens every other Wednesday at 9 p.m. Pacific, and we usually go for about an hour. Tonight we almost did 2 hours. That's great. Yeah, it's always very insightful, deep conversation, learn a lot, and we do welcome questions. So if you had any questions or comments throughout today's stream, you are more than welcome to bring those to us. But if not, you want to kick back and just listen to what's being said, you're also welcome to do that. Yes, safe sects. So like sects as in S-E-C-T-S, which basically, you know, sects of people are like different groups, subgroups of people that have common interests or common, you know, whatever, just different sects. And there can be so many different, basically, communities. How do we practice safe sex means like, how do we create safe sects? How do we create safe spaces and safe communities for the real connections and the real community to be built and the real like cultural change to happen? And we're having these conversations with some of the most elite experts in AI and machine learning and algorithm building for understanding these safe sects. So it's a great privilege and honor that we get a chat with them. So come back in 2 weeks. We'll be back with this one tomorrow. I will not be streaming to Reddit, but we'll be back on Friday night, and I do a series called Best Life Fridays, where we do a deep dive investigating different topics that can all help us get ourselves onto the path towards our best life. It's unique for everybody. We all have our own unique path. But there are, you know, things that we can study together, learn, have discourse, have discussion, that can get us to the best life. Oh, best life. Yeah, Bitcoin didn't get his treat yet. I'll give y'all some partying ASMR. Dawn, how are you doing tonight? What am I doing here? Oh. Crunch, crunch, crunch. That's his ASMR. What's a sect? So a sect is like a group. Let me look up the official dictionary. Actually, let's see here. A group of people with somewhat different religious beliefs, typically regarding as heretical for those of a larger group to which they belong. So like these are just like subgroups. So there can be like political sects, so there could be religious sects, there can be different sects, like sectors. Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. I don't know. Let's see the etymology. Etymology origin is following faction party from the stem of seki, which means to follow. I'm sure it means the same thing. Yeah, learning is fun. I like doing it, but we like have fun while we do it. So joking is allowed. Yeah, we had a lot of good jokes tonight. It was great. Yeah, I guess sector. So let's see. Sect, yeah, cut off, cutter. Oh, it means cut off. Those are different words. Sect is a different word, but maybe, I don't know. I don't have time to go over this right now. I'm gonna go home and rest. It's been a long day. You were buying crystals from your friends live? That's cool. I hope you scored some good ones. Hope you scored some good ones. Oh, Bitcoin, you want to do some more ASMR? Fix us. Thank you for hanging out. Cheers. My name is Elise. I am based in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I stream from my tea table where we have lots of intellectual conversations and we have fun. You know, ultimately we have lots of fun. It's a good thing to have fun. So we do it. But yeah, I'm gonna tune off now. I think, let's see. Twitch, do we have anybody here we can go raid? Go say hi to some friends. Some friends. So there's a lot of people on right now. On Bitcoin, there's a lot of people hanging out. Oh, T-Pens. She's a good friend of ours. What is she doing? She's playing a game? Yeah, let's go. Let's go beat her. Thank you for the follow, Raboid. Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't say thank you earlier. We were in the middle of a very deep intellectual conversation. I'm on a boat. I'm on a boat. Let's go say hi to T-Fins. Whoever's still here, come raid with me. Let's go raid. She's a dear friend. Oh, she's playing games. Well, she drinks tea too, but she's playing a cute game. Let's go watch her. Ooh, you got some cool jade pixie. The dog is a Chihuahua Beagle, and his name is Bitcoin. Who's that? Who's that? Who's that? Who's that? Yeah, he's a cutie. Cutie. Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah, Bitcoin's always around. He hangs out. He hangs out. He manages all of our bits on Twitch. Alright, let's go raid her. Reader, 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 reader. Computer's a little slow today, huh, bitty boy? A little slow. No, we gotta go home, make some dinner. I hope all of y'all ate a good food. It's already 11 o'clock. A little late to be making a dinner. Gotta do what I gotta do. What the heck? Come on. Computer is all frozen. Let's see. Oh, I guess I'm already gone. Alright. I'm gonna tune out. Love you all. Raider Nation. Oh, yeah, Raider Nation here in Vegas. If you're in front of Vegas, you can look me up. Message me on Reddit or just look up T-Let. I've got a tea room. Love to have you. You're always welcome. You can meet Bitcoin. He's famous. He's a celebrity pooch. Oh, he just got a bass, so he smells good. Alright. Bye-bye.